Welcome to our Learning and Development webinar, this sunny but a little bit cooler, but at least we can see the blue sky, Wednesday, August the 18th. Hope everyone's having a great summer, and it's great to see everybody here. Thanks for taking time tonight out of your schedules to come and join us as always. Really looking forward to today's webinar. We have Maria Miller here. I'm going to properly introduce her in a second. And of course, our webinar is CLW, the silent bully, the power of words versus nonverbal communication in the workplace. So Maria is a retired teacher with over 25 years of teaching experience in public schools, settlement agencies, and to international students. Maria is an experienced instructor, facilitator, and trainer who has been providing professional development and training sessions to organizations like the University of Calgary, the Alberta Teachers Association, and TESL Canada, amongst others. She has been providing training sessions on learning styles, multiple intelligences, emotional intelligence, communication strategies, and intercultural communication. She is currently running her teacher and workplace training company established in 2018. And of course, I am Robert Wolfson. I'm the past president of Rotary Club of Calgary Chinook and your Learning Center liaison on the District 5360 Learning and Development Committee. So we're happy to have you tonight. So as always, we'll moderate a Q&A at the end after Maria's presentation. Without further ado, Maria, take it away. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, wherever you are. If you have any questions, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If there are any questions while I talk, feel free to put them in the chat, and Rob is going to monitor that, and if it's important and it's related to what I'm talking about, then we can address it. So, this evening's session is, I hope, interestingly entitled "The Silent Bully," and the reason it's called a silent bully is because most people think of bullying as the voices raised, pumping fists type of violence. There are other ways to be a bully, and this is what we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to start with a little bit of discussion about what communication actually is before we go into the case studies that I prepared for tonight. So communication has a number of key components. The most significant ones that we are used to in our daily lives are the verbal communication, the nonverbal communication, and of course, the cultural aspect of our behavior of our communication. So the first one, the most general definition of communication is really the process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, and behavior. So when we talk about symbols, we really talk about the written language. When we talk about signs, we talk about the nonverbal communication, so gestures, tone of voice, eye contact, and behavior relates to the cultural aspect of our communication, as well as different ways of body language. So in 1948, Harold Laswell created a model for the communication, which very simply describes who says what in what channel to whom and with what effect. And we're talking about interactive communication. So you have a conversation about someone either by email or either by text or in a conference, so verbal or nonverbal, and the effect of that communication reflects back on you, and then it goes in a circle with the effects of the noise. So communication is interaction, has the four components: the source, the channel, the receiver, and the feedback. But this is all affected by the noise. And we're not talking about the phone ringing in another room or the revving engine of a car passing by on the street, but the mental noise that we're dealing with every day. And now more than ever, the mental noise that we have to deal with affects our communication in such ways that it's easy for us to lose our temper. It's very easy for us to become distracted, to become angry. So these are some of the very important components of our interaction with people, how to control the noise that affects our communication and our attention in our daily life, and specifically in the workplace. So probably not a lot of people know that a study has demonstrated that the nonverbal communication is the biggest part of our communication. So if you look at this chart, you'll see that in any given communication, 7% of the words are the ones that we pay attention to. But 55% is what we pay attention when it comes to nonverbal communication, especially body movements. The way you move your head, the way you blink, the way you use your arms to gesticulate, and so on. And 38% to the voice, the tone, the modulation, the pauses, the hesitation, the pitch, the speed at which you talk. So if you look at this chart, you realize that most of our communication is really based not on words, but on the nonverbal aspect of the communication. Of course, when we are listening to something and when we are trying to understand the message, the focus will clearly be on the communication, the information part of the communication. But when we do a face-to-face communication, more than 90% is non-verbal communication. So let's have a look at what non-verbal communication actually is. So this is a non-exhaustive list of what non-verbal communication is, and you can start anywhere in this circle, and you will have an example of what affects you when you talk with someone. So body language, eye contact, blinking, tone of voice, facial expressions, smell, personal presentation, gestures, pitch, and posture. Now, during the COVID, we had the nonverbal communication component reduced to basically the visual interaction of someone on the screen. But this is going to happen. This is going to stop. So we're going to go back to normal at one point, and we need to realize that after sitting in front of the computer, for so long, we get very little affected by someone's smell or personal presentation or gestures or posture. When we talk with someone in person, we look at all these things. But when we do the over the internet or in a Zoom meeting or whatever internet communication we have, we don't care about the eye contact. Sometimes we don't even see the people that we talk to. We don't care about the body language because, like in this instance, you only see my head. But we need to be aware that once this is finished, and we will be finished, we need to relearn all these skills. The verbal communication, on the other hand, are very common to everyday communication, and it doesn't have to be in person. Sometimes they're only in writing. And here's an example of what verbal communication is: giving instructions and directions, providing feedback, teaching, presenting a report or giving updates in a meeting, giving a speech, a toast, or an obituary, doing small talk, doing a break, and of course, all the social situations that we have been avoiding to do: banking, shopping, waiting for the bus and train, and so on. All of this, and of course, many other verbal communication situations are usually done in person. And with a nonverbal communication, so the two together, this is basically what we actually do in order to communicate, to share information, to provide feedback, to receive feedback, and so on. Now, there are a number of communication strategies presented in any book that you can get your hands on. And I have made here a brief list of what I think is the most important short list of this communication strategies. So what I like to talk about is really positive communication. And in order to have positive communication, you need to use a number of strategies, a number of skills that can be learned, and usually are learned in childhood, in school, in different environments. But the most important thing is for people to actually apply them in their communication instances, their communication situations. So the list that I made here, it's not a complete list, but I think this is what needs to be the most important list of positive communication. So communication strategies, and we're going to look at some communication strategies in the case studies that I prepared for tonight. Find the key conflict resolution tips, be emotionally intelligent, and we're going to listen to a video of Daniel Goleman explaining what emotional intelligence is. Possess extended cultural intelligence knowledge, and because today's or tonight's session is short, I will provide you with some links to learn more about cultural intelligence if you're interested. Understand the multiple intelligence theory and be able to apply it, be mindful, and be a competent listener. So I would like to share with you a video of Daniel Goleman explaining what emotional intelligence is, and then we are going to open the floor for some questions. So.
Emotional intelligence refers to how well we handle ourselves and our relationships. There are 4 domains: self-awareness, knowing what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, which is a basis of, for example, good intuition, good decision making. Also, it's a moral compass. The second part is self-management, which means handling your distressing emotions in an effective way so that they don't cripple you, they don't get in the way of what you're doing, and yet attuning them to them when you need to so that you learn what you must. Every emotion has a function. Also, marshaling positive emotions, getting ourselves involved, enthused about what we're doing, aligning our actions with our passions. The third is empathy, knowing what someone else is feeling. And the fourth is putting that all together in skilled relationship. So that's what I mean by emotional intelligence. There are many definitions out there. The part of the brain, it turns out, that it supports emotional and social intelligence is actually the last circuitry of the brain to become anatomically mature. And because of neuroplasticity, the brain shapes itself according to repeated experiences. So my argument is, hey, we should be teaching kids regularly, over time, in a systematic way, self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skill. And in fact, there are now enough programs, and they've been around enough in schools, that they're about to publish a huge meta-analysis looking at hundreds of schools and kids that had the program versus those that don't. And guess what? All antisocial behavior, disruption in class, violence in school, goes down 10%. Pro-social behavior, liking school, well-behaved, up 10%. Academic achievement scores up 11%. So it really pays. Executive function, which is mediated by the prefrontal lobe, both helps you manage your emotions and helps you pay attention. So as kids learn these skills, they also learn basic learning skills. I think that the fact that that was an argument was one thing that caught people's attention. Then there was a little chapter on called Managing with Heart, which argued that leaders who were sons of a bitch were actually defeating the company's own mission. And I think that made a lot of people happy because they work for people like that. I don't know, some people gave it to other people because they thought they needed help in this domain. I'm sure there's a zillion reasons why people like the book. I know IQ has been going up for 100 years as children encounter a more sophisticated cognitive environment as they grow. I don't know that we're becoming more emotionally intelligent. I like to hope we would, but I think that the number of intergroup wars going on, the intergroup hatred going on, levels of familial abuse, in other words, indicators of emotions out of control in dangerous ways, don't look that great, which is why I'm a very strong proponent of getting these social emotional learning programs in every school worldwide. You have to remember that emotional intelligence is a range of abilities: self-awareness, emotional self-management, empathy, social skills. Women tend to be better than men on average at empathy, particularly emotional empathy, sensing in the moment how the other person is feeling, and also it's at social skills, at keeping things feeling good between people and a group. Men, on the other hand, tend to be better on average at self-confidence, particularly in groups, and at managing distressing emotions. But what's very interesting is if you look at leaders who are in the top 10%, there's no difference between the men and the women on any of those variables. In other words, you have a whole human being. So I would say that on average, there probably are differences, men and women, in this domain of ability. But as people develop their skills, as people become more effective, they pick up strengths in areas that they need. I think that emotional intelligence is a universal, but it looks different in different places. Japan has a very rigid set of rules of social interaction, lots of subtleties. Americans typically blunder into the Japanese system, don't get what's going on. And, it's embarrassing, but they wouldn't recognize necessarily emotional intelligence in Japanese setting. Brazil is a very different culture. It's very outgoing, kind of like an Italian culture. And so it would look different there. But I think the fundamentals are the same.
So the reason I wanted you to listen to this video and explanation of what emotional intelligence is done by the author, Daniel Goleman, is because the two case studies that we will talk about and we will look at tonight actually touch on his comments about women being more empathetic, and about the reason why people like emotional intelligence. I'm not sure if we can get any questions at this point. Anybody has any comments, any questions? I've noticed that the chat was popping up from time to time. I'm not sure if Rob has any questions.
There's no questions yet, Maria, so you can carry on.
Okay, all right. So emotional intelligence, as described by Daniel Goleman, is the ability to understand, use, and manage your own emotions in positive ways, to relieve stress, communicate effectively, empathize with others, overcome challenges, and diffuse conflict. So the case studies that we're going to look at tonight are the exact opposite, are the bad examples of what probably some of us, or a lot of us, had to deal with in the workplace, as well as in our daily lives. So the first case study that I would like to present is called The Challenged Manager. And I'm going to read this for you. And I'm going to also give you a minute or so for you to read it yourselves. So this particular case is taken from my own personal professional life. It goes like this. You are called into the manager's office and reprimanded for taking a stand toward the implementation of a new work process and evaluation. There was no consultation done amongst the staff. The rules were imposed by a higher authority, and that resulted in extra unpaid work, among other issues. You tried to address the issue in a staff meeting, but you're cut off by the manager in front of everybody, who used thoughtless language and a raised voice, obviously angry to be challenged. So I'm going to give you a couple of, a minute or so for you to read this yourselves. And then we're going to try to discuss about it. Okay, so what would be the consequences of such behavior on the part of the manager towards the team members, the employees? Well, consequences and repercussions are people become upset, people become unhappy. They sometimes don't want to deal with this anymore, so they leave, which basically turns the company into a revolving door, creates a very negative workplace, and creates a negative impact on the challenges, on the persons, the personal lives of people. It tends to split the department into those who are okay, or they choose not to take a stand. Ultimately, people try to cut corners to complete the job. If there is too much work to do, they'll just do it with the whatever attitude. And in my particular case, a number of senior staff actually left the company because they were fed up with the amount of work they had to do. They were not recognized for any of the ideas to improve the productivity, or to basically get the message across that enough is enough. So the situation that I'm presenting to you is something that happened to me, and I believe it happened to a lot of people. And in my case, I decided that I don't want to work there anymore because of the continuous overworking and underpaying attitude of the manager. And because there was no one who would listen to us. There was no one we could go to and discuss, not necessarily complain, but discuss what can be done to make people understand why someone who has no experience can make such decisions in our names. So the 4 points that I made here really relate to the ability of the manager to understand that people need to be consulted, especially when it comes to the daily activities or the daily work that they need to be doing, and that the my way or the highway attitude is not going to work in favor of the company, and that's why it will create a toxic environment, working environment. Is going to divide people, is going to turn people against each other, and ultimately people will just leave. Any comments, any questions, anything that you would like to share before we move to the next one? Okay. So the next case study is a toxic workplace, and it will be interesting for you to notice that this time it's women against the men and not men against women like usually is, or men against men or women against women. This is something that happened to a very good friend of mine. He actually was very uncomfortable sharing this situation, but I think it would make a very interesting case study, especially because of the context. So a group of female employees banded together and have been constantly picking on a couple of male employees that was not part of their ethnic group. Nothing the men do is good enough for them, and they constantly make false complaints about their incompetence to the supervisor, who is also a woman and from the same ethnic group. One of the men has decided to make an official complaint to his union representative and to human resources about the constant harassment and bullying. He decided not to get the supervisor involved, feeling that she was biased, and has allowed for the situation to get out of control. So I'm going to allow you to read this by yourselves. Martin says the four-way test can be used in this situation. Oh yes, absolutely. We definitely need that person to take some rotary training. So what are the consequences and repercussions? So my friend told me that there was an absolute irrational behavior inside of the workplace. There was bullying and harassment. There was violent and foul language. There were times when people were reduced to tears because of this attitude. There was stress and depression at work that started to bleed in their personal lives. Ultimately, everything turned into a toxic workplace. There was a hateful attitude on both sides of the conflict, and he decided to leave. He said, well, I've had enough. I cannot get anybody to at least listen to my issues. So he decided to leave. So these are some serious instances when people are forced to take action, and some of the time, if possible, or most of the time, if possible, people just leave that toxic workplace. But a lot of times we can't leave the workplace for whatever reasons. But on the other hand, there is something that we can do to stand up to such bad managers and group of people who are basically putting us down. So here are some key concepts for conflict resolution. And I grouped them into two because communication is the main focus of this particular session. And each one has a number of points. In this particular case, listening without interrupting each other is a key component. Showing understanding of the problem, presenting your point of view of the situation, and explaining how you feel should happen at the very early stages of the conflict. If you let it linger for too long, there may be a point of no return when people basically refuse to sit down and discuss and understand each other. The second component is negotiation. There are so many ways we can make compromises without actually backing away. We can work on brainstorming possible solutions. We can accept a compromise. We can choose a fair solution for both parties. We can implement the plan that we brainstormed, or we can bring someone from the outside to listen to both sides and perhaps get involved in the discussion and getting to the bottom of this whole situation. One other key component is to become a competent listener. And it's very difficult when you're angry, when you lose your temper, it's very difficult to take a step back or take a deep breath, count to 10 and try to listen, especially if you know or if you feel like you are right and the others are wrong. So in order to become a competent listener, you need to listen to words with sensitivity, become a mindful listener. Listening between the lines to the nonverbal messages. Someone with their arms crossed or with the frown on their faces, or not looking you straight in the face, or having a dismissive attitude, it's not going to lead to a productive discussion or to productive communication. A mindful listener or competent listener edits and shapes their message to make it more accurate and easier to understand. And there are so many ways to disagree with people. And they can be very harsh, they can be very direct, but then there are so many ways to be very mindful and to disagree with people without actually hurting them. Using truthful information makes it so much easier. And a mindful listener does not achieve their goals by coercion. You do this otherwise or else. So this wheel of communication, you can start at any of the little wedges, has to come full circle in order for you to prove that you're a good listener. So if we start with being aware of your communication with yourself and others, then you need to move on to effectively use and interpret your verbal messages, and then look at the nonverbal aspect of your communication, interpret it appropriately, and then adapt your message to others and listen and respond thoughtfully. So no matter where you start in this wheel, you have to come full circle in order to be a good listener, a mindful listener, and a competent listener. So let's look at some ways we can agree. You took the words right out of my mouth. I couldn't agree with you more. You can say that again. My thoughts exactly. Great minds think alike. You got that right. Tell me about it. Absolutely. And there are so many other expressions that we use, and depending on who you're talking to, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you can be even more friendly, you can be more persuasive. But here's a list of things that I personally had to deal with many times in my working life, in my professional life. And this is something you cannot say when you disagree. So really? Oh, I don't think so. Not in a million years. You're wrong. No way. And the worst of all, oh, go to hell. And it was said to me several times, oh, yeah, whatever. If you don't agree with me, go to hell. But there are so many other ways to disagree nicely and mindfully without having to hurt anybody. I'm not sure I agree with you, but I'd hate to disagree with, and they may sound cheesy, but they're not. Trust me, they are not cheesy at all. Don't you think that, well, how about, I hope you can reconsider, why don't we think or consider this from a different angle or different perspective? So as a teacher for many years, I had to deal with, and as an adult teacher for many years and trainer too, I had to deal with people who were unhappy because they didn't get the proper mark, what they thought would be the correct mark or the proper mark. I had to deal with student teachers that would come and say, yeah, but I don't agree with this. I don't want to do it this way because I don't think this is the proper way. And they would do it in such an angry and dismissive way that it basically you freeze. You don't know what to say. So learning how to agree to disagree makes a big, big, big difference. And that's what I was trying to teach my students. And that's what I was trying to teach the student teachers that would come into our programs. How do you deal with something like this if you are a teacher and your student disagrees with you? How do you disagree with your trainer or with your mentor? So in order for us to become mindful listeners, in order for us to use emotional intelligence in very, very bad situations, we need to feel connected amongst ourselves. We need to understand the relationship between us and our family, our friends, our coworkers. We need to basically look after our personal well-being. It's not easy. It's a very difficult task. And sometimes we're overwhelmed by emotion. Sometimes we're overwhelmed by what we see and what we hear around us. But taking a step back, taking a deep breath and counting to 10 before we shout, yell, or put down makes the difference between good communication and actually conflict. Someone here says in the chat, says that is what HR departments are for. Well, that is very true. But where I used to work, there was no HR department. So basically the manager was all powerful and it was my way or the highway. There was no union representative. There was no way that I could prove that the manager was out of line. So yes, human resources department should be able to deal with such instances, but not every workplace has, and especially the small businesses, institutions that have small groups of people, or they don't have human resources or union, makes it very, very difficult for someone who feels bullied, harassed, to get the support that they need.
That's a good point as well, Ria. Maybe
Yeah.
Ria,
Yeah.
maybe you can comment
So
on
count to 10 and take deep breaths. Oh yeah. What I usually do, and this is something really my son taught me, is Mom, take a deep breath and count to 3. And if it doesn't work, count to 10. So if you can, pull yourself together and basically start the simmering down after number 3, then that means you're on the right path. If it doesn't, if you still feel very angry, and if you feel like, oh, there's no way I'm going to put up with this, count to 10, but then realize that the more you raise your voice, the easier it is for people to escalate. And it's going to go up and higher and higher and higher until it could become a shouting match.
One of the things that I learned over time was the control is really with yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And not only the 10 deep breaths and the count to 10, but if I couldn't say anything that I wanted to say, I just said, thanks for sharing. And then I left the situation, because when you have those strong emotions, you really do not have the time. It's like one time in a public speaking thing, you know, we all have to have butterflies, but you got to teach them to fly in formation. So when you're in a conflict situation, you don't always have that opportunity, and you're better to withdraw. You're better just to say something like, thanks for sharing, and I'll get back to you, or something, because you lose every time if you don't control the emotion.
I so agree with you, because I'm a
Yeah.
very emotional person, and I am not a spontaneous person either. So I participate in a discussion. I can see that there's this tension building up, and I would like to say something to put the person in their place, but I know better, and I try not to burst into tears if it's, you know, if it's a professional situation. So I just walk away. I, just like you, I say, well, we have to talk about this some other time, and I walk away. Sometimes it works, but sometimes I notice that people feel that, oh, what a coward, she's chicken, she can't stand up for herself. Well, it's a matter of perspective, really, because it's personality. Ultimately, we're talking about how comfortable are you to put someone in their place at the right moment without actually causing an escalation of the conflict. I don't know. I don't think that's happened. That's possible. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think I could do that. There's a very interesting questions here, or comments, I should say. Question about psychologists' time. Men have better self-confidence than women, especially groups. This is concerning for women and girls, and I think it should repaired. What I noticed, and being a school teacher as well as an adult, so I started my career as a school teacher, and I noticed that the girls tend to band together, and they become more difficult to deal with than boys. I see Rob smiling. Well, it is true. It's true, because if you compare a group of boys to a group of girls, we're talking about teenagers here, you will find it very difficult to put the girls in their place. But with men, with young men, usually it's just a matter of, and that's my personal experience, and doesn't have to be true, or you may feel different about it, but with the boys, you just need to look at them, give them the look, and they would stop. With the girls, oh my God, I don't know. That's my personal experience. As I said, I taught teenagers, I taught grade 10s and 12s, and if you lose their trust, there's nothing you can do to gain it back. Someone here says it's important to try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Absolutely. Try to understand why they feel the way they do. This puts you in a much better position to find a solution. Absolutely. And that's where the negotiator actually comes in, because the negotiator can be impartial. So listening to the both sides of the story, right? So you should try to deal with the supervisor on their own and not battle it out with an audience. It puts the supervisor on the spot and has to respond from power. Absolutely, I agree. But the fact that this particular person reacted that way, it was clear to a lot of us that there was something that this particular person didn't want to happen in the public. So they didn't want people to say, well, we disagree with this decision, simply because he or she may have been part of that decision, and we're questioning authority, right? So when you say, well, I don't think this is the right way to go about this, you question authority in the end. And some managers, some leaders are not comfortable having their authority questioned. Yeah, girls carry grudges and the battle continues. What about you? Yes.
Another good comment from Paul. Good listeners learn not to be afraid of silences. Don't jump into the silence too quickly. They could be trying to find a way to express themselves.
Very good point. Very good point. They are the ones who continue talking and talking, and they just get deeper and deeper and deeper in this hole that they're digging for themselves. And I like this expression. They put their foot deeply in their mouths, and they keep accusing and placing the blame on someone else. It's never my responsibility. It's never me who did this. It's not my fault. It's never my fault, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I think that's a very good point.
So there's also a great comment, Maria. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to read it yet because you're answering that other comment. So from Manon, which says, I always find the 3-part assertive message to help in difficult situations. Number 1 is to state what you observed. Focus on the action, not the person. Number 2 is state how this made you feel. And finally, number 3, state the impact of the action. Then listen to the other person. This helps show the other person that you don't have something against them and that their actions have an impact. Of course, you can ask for a different action after the person has had a chance to respond. That's a great, those are great points.
That's a great comment. And when you enter into a conflict situation like the one that I presented, getting people to actually sit down and acknowledge that there is something that needs to be talked about and there's a conflict that needs to be addressed. If you are able to do this, then half of the battle is won. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't work that way unless you, I don't know, bring in an outsider or try to get the leader of the pack or leader of the group, whatever you want to call it. And it may sound very harsh, but sometimes there are, and it doesn't have to be the same ethnic group. It doesn't have to be only women or only men. It could be a group of people. But if you can get them to sit down and talk about it, then half of the battle is won. That's what I've noticed with my students. Every time there was some tension in the classroom and this group didn't want to work with this group, or this student teacher didn't want to help this other group because of whatever reasons, I would get them to sit down and talk about it. And that made a difference. And they learned that, oh, so next time this is going to happen, I'm going to have to sit down, listen to each other, and try to solve the problem before it escalates into something that we cannot deal with anymore. And Dominica says, boys can be disruptive. No kidding. I have a son. And every time he doesn't want to do something, I love him dearly. And I think he's an awesome young man. But there are times when he says, it's okay, Mom. Don't worry. I'm going to do it the way I want. So, yeah, depending on the situations, I think we need to be mindful of how to diffuse these situations and how to basically get people to sit down and talk about it. Monica says it takes a physical toll to be this positive and redirecting and listening. Sometimes you just want to tell them to go to hell, but you don't. It is physically and psychologically too. It's draining.
there's-
But at the end of the day, if you don't, or if you don't try at least, you may end up with a conflict on your hands. So yes, I'm sorry, Rob, I interrupted
No,
you.
no, sorry. I thought you were done. My apologies. I didn't mean to interrupt you. There are two questions, so I just want to
Yep.
make sure we have
Yep.
we have time, but I just want to make sure we don't forget them. So the first question was: should Rotary clubs have their own HR department?
Martin, can you answer that question? I don't know. I can't answer that question. Well, not an HR department per se, but maybe something like an ombudsman or someone you can go to and say, well, I don't really like the way this person treated me. But remember, we have the 4-way of assessing the situation, right? And point number 3, that is it beneficial to all, if I'm correct, if I quote the 4-way test correctly, is where you should sit, stop and reflect on what's been happening. But to have an HR department, I don't know.
So another question is: give us some helpful tips when I am the person initiating the bullying.
Well, okay, so I'm going to be very direct, and I'm going to use a quote of someone that said that. I read it somewhere. I can't remember exactly where that was, but this person said that bullies are cowards. So I'm not saying that all bullies are cowards, but bullying happens for a number of reasons. It could be the reasons that I've read about and the reasons that I really researched about are a crave for attention. So that's one of the main reasons why people bully, crave attention, and they want to be the leaders of their group and so on. And because people don't pay attention to them, they try to get their attention in ways that are detrimental. And another reason that I read about is people become bullies because they feel inferior and they want to prove themselves. Now, I don't know why a person would want to well, if you acknowledge that you are a bully, then that means you realize that what you're doing is not the right thing to do. So sitting down and I'm not a psychologist. I can only tell you what I learned in school and what I learned through my years of teaching and training. But what I've observed with young people, young adults, and young learners is that they become very frustrated when something doesn't go their way. And if there is no intervention, that frustration keeps building and building and building. And what happens is they find something or someone to take it back out. So I can only tell you from my own experience that, and from my research and from my work experience, that a bully has, in their perspective, a good reason to be a bully. And unless there's some intervention happening, and you sit down with the person and see, well, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why you're like this? You can't get the straight answer. Why is this happening?
Okay, one more question. Great answer. One more question. How best to deal with bullies who go the passive aggressive route?
Oh my goodness. Well, like I said, I'm not a psychologist, but from my experience, the passive aggressive attitude is the worst to deal with, because no matter what you do, they're going to say, nope, I don't know. I don't want to. I don't care. But like I said, what I usually do and what I like to do, no matter what the situation is, try to understand what's happening. What is the background of the whole story? Why is this person so frustrated? Why is this person always angry? Why is this person not willing to join a group or to do an activity? And most of the cases that I had to deal with, getting to the bottom of the problem usually solves the problem, not entirely, but solves most of it, so that the person actually sits down and asks for help. As I said, as a teacher, as a trainer, I had many instances when I observed the reactions and interactions in my classroom and actually had to step in. But stepping in and saying, hey, shut up, or hey, stop that. It's not going to work. You have to make it so that everybody is treated respectfully and everybody understands that while there's a story for each of the sides, they need to sit down and talk about it and find together the solution. Because otherwise, there's nothing we can do to solve these conflicts.
So there's time for one more question, which just entered the chat, Maria, which I'm sure you can read it as I read it out to everyone.
Okay.
This is from Paul again. I'm reminded of situations where my first response was, I don't agree, then tried to explain myself. But based on your explanation, I should have started with something like, how about this idea? Is that correct?
Well, from I got my hands on a book called, it was written by a negotiator, and it was strategies of nonverbal communication and strategies of nonviolent communication. So this person had to deal with situations where there were hostages taken, and he had to diffuse the situation. So he would present these cases, and he would tell you, he was a psychologist by training, and he would present all these cases, and it was so interesting to see his point of view and his perspective, why you would start with a positive as opposed to a negative. So when we disagree on things, we tend to say no. So the first word we utter most of the time is no. Now think about it. If you start with no, that means you disagree. No is a negative word. And when you say no, I don't agree with you, the double negation in English, which is very uncommon, basically creates a barrier. So when you try to express your opinion and you start with a no, or I don't care, that attitude, the communication stops. If you try to start with a positive attitude, say with something like, let's think about it, or I think we can do this in a better way, you allow the other person to explain or to bring in arguments. The moment you say no, the person, like, we as people are used to, the fight or flight. So we either stand our ground or we move away. Certain people are used to having it their way all the time. And when you say no, they perceive it as a threat. So starting with the positive, or starting with something that does not include the word no, makes it easier to continue the communication. So that's a communication perspective. There have been studies done since the 1800s. How people react to certain introductory discussions. Most of the time, when you start a conversation with no, or when someone asks you to do something or to say something and you start with no, that's where the communication stops. So starting with something positive allows the communication to keep going.
So 2 other quick questions and we'll wrap up because we're right at that time.
Yep.
And I'll allow you to close off and I'll say my goodbyes as well. So these are quick questions. What was the 38% part of the graph? Do you remember? Can you go back to that graph?
Yep, I can go back. And the 38% of the graph was really the body expression. Oh, there we go, almost there. And you should get a copy of this presentation.
Yeah.
It's the voice tone modulation and pauses. So basically, it includes also the speed, hesitation, all the ahs and ums that you use when you do your talking. It was very interesting when I first talked about this at a teachers convention, the teachers conference, that they realized that, wow, only 7% is actually perceived as communication. I said, no, it's 7% that we only pay attention towards 7% of the entire act of communication. The rest, especially when it's in person or face to face, is focused on the way your body behaves and the voice, the way your voice modulates, the way you're talking. You can distract someone by blinking a lot, or by not looking at them, or by gesticulating a lot. Like for me, if someone talks with their hands a lot, I just focus on the hands and I don't hear anything else. So that's
Interesting. Yep.
yeah, that's a research
Perfect.
done
Thank
in
you.
the 70s, I believe. Yeah.
Then who was the author of the book?
Oh, I think I have it here. Maybe I have it here, or I don't. I know did I send this? Oh, I didn't.
That's okay. We can get it to Iola. That's okay. If you
Yeah.
if you can
So
let me know.
I can send you the list of I have a bibliography that usually goes with this presentation, and it lists all the videos and all the books that I referred to. I made references to.
Okay. So Iola, we're gonna find that out for you. Okay. Perfect.
Mhm.
So it's 7:59. So just do you have any closing comments before I end the webinar, Maria?
No, that just that I really appreciate you taking, or everybody taking the time to participate to this. I hope I shared some of my personal experience that will help you deal with something similar, or any potential I don't know conflict in the workplace, as well as in personal life.
Yeah.
And have a good night and stay safe.
Yes, thanks. So I just want to say just a quick closing on behalf of the Learning and Development Committee, of course, Brian Callahan, Rick Eistad. I'm just filling in for those two fine Rotarians. So thanks everyone for taking time out of their evening tonight to listen. Maria, thank you. Very, very thought-provoking conversation, and to everyone in the, it was great chat as well. So thanks everyone for putting very thoughtful comments and adding to the discussion as well. Thanks DG Martin for taking time out of your busy schedule. Always appreciate it when you can join in and listen. And with that, thanks everyone. Have a great night, and thanks again for taking the time.